Just when we thought we were all out of default information, there have been a bunch of interviews released with developers Joseph Pipora and Kaylee Calder. Some of these interviews were actually the same interview, whereas others are different ones that have been translated from Korean into English. There's a lot of cool information in here, and some of them you'll need to take with a pinch of salt as the translations are rarely one-to-one, but there's lots of cool stuff. We have info on endgame, MMO elements, PvP gear. They've also spoke on respecking again, and didn't some of you want to stay as a werewolf permanently as a druid? Well, lots to talk about, guys, and let's just jump straight into things. First up, are there any plans to adjust the skill cost? To which they replied, we got a lot of feedback from the beta and will continue to look into it, but we still think the current cost level is reasonable. Since it is a game that will be a live service, adjustments will be possible after launch. We want gold to feel meaningful at low level. The respec cost will be so low that you can hardly feel it. This lines up with what they have been saying more recently, and it seems like at the end game it's going to be more expensive because they want gold to be meaningful and they don't just want us respecking all the time. I think as we're leveling up, they want us to figure out what kind of build we want, so at that point it will be cheap. However, as we're really filling out our builds, I don't think they just want us to be able to instantly spec to a completely different build at end game. I know that there's split opinions on this, but that seems to be what they're sticking with right now. Next up, they were asked what would be resetting each season, and this will answer the question that a lot of us have. As we create seasons, we aim to provide new experiences. Hard resets are planned for each season, but stat points obtained from the Altar of Lilith will not be included in the reset. Potions or skill points will be reset, but the bonuses obtained from the altar will be permanently spread out to all characters in the season. Various tools will be prepared to make the reputation system feel as unrepetitive as possible. The way that I understand this is that the Altars of Lilith may reset so that you can redo the renown system each season, but you will keep those permanent stats that you got the first time doing it, and it's most likely that redoing the renown system each season will just be to get the skill points and the potion unlocks each time. And you have to bear in mind, you don't have to get every Altar of Lilith to get the potion and skill increases in any given zone. So maybe you'll pick a few up as you go, but in both versions of the game I've played, you didn't have to get many of those altars to max out the renown in that area. So if it's like that when the seasons launch, you probably won't have to hunt the Altars of Lilith every season, which I think is good. I know that most people didn't want to do that. Next up, they were asked about the repetitive nature of dungeons, and also some concern was showed for nightmare dungeons, to which they replied, during the open beta period, we showed a limited amount of content and a limited level of 25 and only within fractured peaks. But in the official release, we are releasing more appearances, dungeon types, layouts, and monsters overall. Nightmare dungeons will play a big role in endgame, and there is a special dungeon where you can test your power and skills you have accumulated so far to unlock a new world tier. These dungeons, which are called capstone dungeons, are longer than normal dungeons, and boss battles also have different abilities and affixes. Now, most of this we already knew, but it's actually interesting just to add, they've also spoken about 2 new dungeon affixes. One of them we heard about in a leak, which is an invincible pillar of lightning that will chase down the player throughout the dungeon, and to get away from this, you will periodically have to get inside a bubble so that you don't get one shot. And the other affix is a shade that follows the player, and if you touch it, it will obscure your vision and summon additional enemies. That one sounds kind of rough. We still don't know how many of these will be in the game, but it seems like nightmare dungeons specifically are going to have these extra conditions you're going to have to put up with as you're trying to get through them. Next up, they were asked how long it would take to complete the main story quest, to which they replied, you're looking at about 25 to 30 hours from 1 to 50, and in Diablo 4, level 50 is where the end game content begins. Reaching level 100 is not the only goal in itself, and once you are there, you will want to find the perfect skills, abilities, and equipment to perfect your build. Basically, end game stuff. We also learned from these interviews that they estimate the season pass will take roughly 80 hours, and the reaching level 100 in a season should take you a little longer than that based on how you play. I'm sure there's going to be a farm that we all find though, and it isn't going to take that long, but that's what they estimate before we start cheesing everything anyway. Next up, they were asked about the content cycle, to which they responded, there is a circular structure that you can follow naturally. literally. Turning the Whispers of the Dead will give you a seal that allows you to enter a nightmare dungeon, and as you complete nightmare dungeons, you'll get points for the Paragon board. However, some of the content exists completely independently. For example, there are Hell Tides, of which we learned that multiple zones can be affected by Hell Tides at once, and originally we thought the entire zone turned into a Hell Tide, but actually it's more like big regions in some of the zones will turn into Hell Tides. And also there will be different versions of the other bosses in the game that roam within Hell Tides and will offer specific rewards when you kill them. I know that from the leaks, for example, one of them was the Khazra Abomination, who you would fight in the dungeons in the beta, and there is also another boss specific to the PvP zone that roams, but it is not available as far as we know in the Helltide zone. Also, the cyclical nature that they talk about in here is what they seem to want with the game, where if you want to socket an item, you'll need to do world bosses. If you want to get Paragon points, maybe you need to grind the end game dungeons, and there will be a specific thing that you'll want to farm for different parts of your build that will come only from one of the different challenges. And if they ever add raids or additional content, it's assumed that that will also be similar, where you'll want to do a specific type of activity to get a specific thing in game. They were also asked if there is going to be a way to trade essences of a legendary item. I assume from this translation that they mean aspects, to which the response was there are various tradable items that can be obtained from the end game content, including elixir items, rare items, and legendary aspects. We don't know how many of these are tradable, how often they're tradable, or anything yet, and probably won't know until the game releases. They were also asked about the item drop rate, which I know we clarified before in another video, but they responded with unique items will be very rare, and these items we're talking about are much more powerful than a legendary item. Sets are not available at launch, however, and they're not saying that they will never be available, but at the launch they won't be. So we're talking set pieces here, and the reason that they don't want to do this is they don't want this to be the only thing you can use. They want to try to keep build diversity for as long as possible, and they think that one way of doing that is to not bring out sets, at least when the game launches. If you're a druid main, you'll probably like this next one. The druids you met in the open beta only transform when you use skills, which is different from the druids in Diablo 2 who maintain their transformations. In the future, will there be a passive or skill that always maintains your werewolf state in the end game? To which they responded with, what I wanted to add while making the current version of druid was to be able to flexibly go through bears and wolves. Among the items that can be used later, there are unique armors that will allow you to permanently remain in werewolf form. Our intention was to transform flexibly, but there are times where it's fun to deviate from the rules. So basically, there is going to be gear that allows you to permanently be in the werewolf or werebear form. I think that's really cool, and I hope that all of the classes have things that completely change up how they work like that. There's also a couple of good questions in here about PvP content, which asked what's more important, player skill or item level, basically, to which they replied, of course items and synergies are important, but the player's skill is also important. You must have the ability to avoid the opponent's skills and land your skills. The strength of an item or character is not the only factor. Ultimately, both are important. I think the two things, skills and your build, should be properly harmonized. In addition, although there may be some differences in the items themselves equipped in PvP content, they will be adjusted to have similar power. So this basically means there's going to be some kind of scaling for PvP, but of course, if some of the things on your gear just make skills better, that won't be scaled. And honestly, in a game like this, trying to balance the PvP is kind of pointless because there's so many overpowered things, and it's generally just fun to kind of farm people on something until it gets nerfed and then find another build that's good. That's what usually happens in these kinds of games, and they basically answered this question too, because they were asked if one-shot kills will be possible and if there will be PvP gear, to which they replied there are currently no plans for specific items or attributes for PvP. Overall, the PvP content itself may not be perfectly balanced. It's because it feels like an open world brawl. Diablo 4's PvP content itself is for slaughter rather than for honor. And again, basically confirming that everything's going to be broken, but honestly, they'll probably be pretty fun too. Next up, they were asked about build diversity on the Paragon board, to which they replied, on the Paragon board, you can go through certain gates. Once you pass that gate, you'll be contemplating which board to choose. When you create your own build, when you find a node that you really want, you turn the Paragon board so that you can select that symbol or node. The Paragon board itself isn't symmetrical. A very very powerful rare node may be on the other corner of a certain Paragon board. Legendary nodes are in the middle, but you may think it's very interesting for you to rotate the Paragon board to get you closer to the nodes that you want. It's also important to note that they have spoke on how long it will take to max out the Paragon board, and I assume that means every node. I didn't think that would be possible, but they have said it will take a very long time, and depending on the play style, it might not be something that every player can easily accomplish in a single season. So actually getting everything on the Paragon board so that you can max out everything is going to take a really long time, and trying to min-max how to do that in each season is something that the hardcore players are definitely going to want to try and do. Also, they have said that post-launch quarterly updates will introduce additional quest lines that tie into the new mechanics and features of each season. Rod Ferguson has clarified on Twitter that these quest lines will not be a part of the main campaign, but rather introduce a new content like seasonal mechanic. The quarterly updates will also include the season pass, and on top of the free season pass, the premium one will be $10. And last up, the important question about this being an MMO, and what they have said is that Diablo 4 is an action RPG first. Blizzard is trying to make Sanctuary feel bigger by including local events and players appearing alongside you to help with these events. However, this design approach should feel more organic and not feel like group activities in an MMO. They want everyone to be a damage dealer, and the team doesn't intend to balance different builds based on party play. Now, this does kind of go against some of the design in the game and is definitely a little confusing. I think a lot of people that do enjoy party play would agree that the game felt better in a party, but it is cool that they're trying to appeal to everyone. I'm just intrigued to see how this is going to go. I mean, there's clan functionality. They've said that they want to expand on the clan functionality, which would mean more group content, but then in the same vein as saying they don't want the game to feel like an MMO and like an action RPG first. So we're going to have to see how this goes, and I think that maybe they haven't figured that one out even for themselves yet. So that's pretty much everything, guys. There was so much information to dig through here. As I said, bear in mind that some of this isn't one-to-one as it was translated from Korean, so take some of this with a pinch of salt, but some good information in here and some stuff to be excited about for launch. Let me know what you guys think to any of this stuff in the comment section down below. Be sure to drop a like, as it does help us out and lets us know you're enjoying the content. Thank you for the insane support on the channel so far, guys. Only 5 videos in. Thank you all for subbing and for watching. Be sure to have a great day. As always, take care and peace, people.